Alright, welcome back. So this will be part 2 in a character rigging tutorial series on how to rig a robot character. Last video we talked about the model setup and how to get our model ready so that we can rig and animate it. In this video we're going to talk about how to create the skeletal joints, which will be the skeletal system of how the body actually moves. So the first thing we got to create are the joints for the body, and then the geometry gets assigned to move when the joints move or rotate. So we're going to create simple joints here. This is going to be in the rigging module. So if I go click on the modeling drop down and go into the rigging module, we're going to start by creating a simple joint. So I'm going to go to skeleton, create joints. And there's a couple different ways that we can create a joint, but I think the most effective way is with the joint tool, just click randomly to create one joint. And I can briefly talk about the joint process. What we're creating is a skeletal system, but what we actually are visually creating when we click is the joint, the rotational point of view for that motion or for that bone. The next joint that I click is going to parent this joint underneath the base joint and put a bone in between that. The bone is not really the important part, the joint is. So here's our base joint. If I click and move that base joint, that moves or rotates every joint underneath that. So that's the parent for this hierarchy. And then I have a second joint that I can rotate or move independently of the base joint, the parent joint, and that's called the child of this joint system. So it's a parent-to-child relationship. Every joint that is parented underneath the other joint will move with that base joint or root joint. So what I usually do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create one joint just anywhere in the grid. Is always going to put a joint in the perspective view on the horizontal grid. I'm going to go ahead and name this. This is going to be my pelvis joint, so J_pelvis. I use J for joint and a capital J to show the distinction in case there's any other lowercase j's in my naming. So capital J_pelvis for joint, and I'm going to zero out my translate. So I'm going to go over to translate X, Y, and Z and type in 0. Puts it back in the center of the grid. And then what I want to do is kind of move this up so it's inside of the main pelvis area. This is the root position of how this robot character will move. I can't see my joint as default, so what I want to do with this view is go to shading X-ray joints so I can see the joint inside the geometry without having to go into wireframe mode. So that's shading X-ray joints. There we go. So this is going to be the root joint for my entire system. So the way I create joints, what I'm going to suggest here is to create one individual joint, position it, and then I'm going to duplicate that joint, Control D, and move that up to the next rotational point of view. Now my next one is actually going to be, I'm going to go to the front view, and in the front view I'm also going to turn on X-ray joints under shading. It's going to be really the upper body rotation for this robot's going to start right here. There's a cylindrical shape in there. So it's going to start right there. So I'm going to put a joint up, but inside is still going to be on the center of the body. So that's going to allow the shoulder area to twist around. All right. So these are going to be rotational joints, core joints. And the next one up here I'm going to put in between the shoulders, and this is going to be a helper joint. I'm not actually going to rotate this joint. I'm going to use this to connect the arms to the torso. So this would just be like an extra spine joint. But for this robot, this joint is not actually going to rotate anything because this is going to be a rigid kind of structure for the upper torso. So that's going to be in between the shoulders. And first, the joints I'm going to create are the joints vertically in the center line of the body. Let's go ahead and rename some of these. So the next joint, spine 1, and then the joint above that, spine 2. I'm not going to parent anything up yet. I want to get all my joints placed properly, and then I'm going to rotate them how I need them to rotate, and then I'm going to parent everything up. So my next joint, I'm going to duplicate this one, and this is really going to be my neck joint. And what I want this to be is in the same exact center location of this neck ball, so that this joint will rotate the neck ball exactly from the center of this joint area. So there's an issue is that it's not easy to kind of snap the joint to the center pivot of the neck ball. There's a neck ball pivot, and I can kind of guess, but it's not going to be perfect. So let me move this out of the way for a second. What I need to do is be able to access that pivot point, and it's called a rotate pivot. So to do that, I'm going to select that neck ball geometry. I'm going to go up to Display, Transform Display, Rotate Pivots. Now that's not going to visually do anything until I hit 4 to go into wireframe. And now that creates this circle crosshair in the middle. And that's the rotate pivot of this ball. Now even with that ball not selected, I can still see that pivot location. So that's what the rotate pivot will turn on, is the pivot point of this ball even when an object is not selected. So now I can take that neck joint and I can hold down the V key, V for vertex, and click and drag until this snaps over the center of that ball geometry. So now I know this neck joint is the exact center of this ball geometry, right? You can see the same exact pivot location there. So that way the joint will rotate based off of the ball's position. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my extra or other joints in my entire body, work my way up to all of these, and turn on my rotate pivots for all of my ball joints, because I know I'm going to need a joint on every location here. Okay, we'll do this side. And I'm only actually going to work on one side of the body because I can mirror joints over. But I'm going to select all of my ball geometry where those joints will be placed. And then I'm going to go to Display, Transform Display, Rotate Pivots. I'm going to turn on the visibility for the rotate pivots for each one of these objects. There you go. You can see that green crosshair right in the middle there. So now when I come down here and duplicate that neck joint again, this is going to be my neck, or my joint head, base of the head, or secondary neck control or neck joint. And I'm going to snap with holding down the V key with that joint to the center of my head ball object. Okay. So that's an easy way to kind of snap joints to the center of an object. I'm going to duplicate again, and this one's going to be for the antenna base. I have an antenna. I'm going to hold down the V key and snap that in. So we'll do antenna, antenna 1. And I want my antenna to smoothly bend and twist and rotate. So I'm going to add more joints here. And I'm not going to snap it to a pivot point, but I'm going to do it to every other vertical loop. So my geometry for my antenna has edge loops going up so it can smoothly deform. And let's go to the front view and we'll turn on wireframe. So I'm going to put a joint every other edge loop. So I'm going to duplicate, move that up there, and we'll duplicate again. I'm hitting Control D every time I duplicate. And I'm working my way up to the top of my antenna. And we'll do one at the very end up there. There we go. Alright, so I have antenna joints that are going to allow this part of the body to move in a smooth way. All the other joints are going to be rigid rotational based motion. Okay. Let's go back to our neck or joint spine 2. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to go into wireframe mode. I'm going to hold down the V key and snap this to the pivot point of my shoulder joint. Duplicate. Move that over. Snap to the pivot point of my elbow. Duplicate. Snap to the pivot point of my wrist. And then we'll keep going down to all the fingers. And I'm just checking to make sure it is at the center each time. I'll come back and adjust rotates later. There you go. So I'm duplicating, snapping over. So make sure it is on top of those joint or geometry pivots every time. Otherwise, your joint's not going to rotate that body part properly. So I'm duplicating, snapping to the next pivot. So if you kind of set things up in kind of an organized way, then these steps go by pretty quickly. It can be easy to set up your rig. All right, we'll come back and name everything later, but This is my pelvis joint. I'm going to duplicate that. And this will be kind of like my shoulder, or not, sorry, my hip. But I'm going to say joint left hip. Okay. So then now I'm going to hold down the V key and snap this to that pivot point for the hip geometry. I'm only going to work on this left side of the body, and I'm going to mirror things over. Copy this down for the knee. Okay. Duplicate again. And just to reiterate, I'm using Control D to duplicate, not copy paste. Alright, so although I don't, this is a flat foot character, I don't really need the toes to wiggle or anything, but I am going to need some joints down here for the base of the toes so that I can keep the foot flat when I need to once I start animating. So I'm going to duplicate. I don't have any real need to wiggle the toes, but I'm going to put a joint. Look from the side view, turn on joint X-ray joints. I'm going to put one right here, the base of where the toes would bend, and one down here at the end of it, something like that. That'll work. Alright, so let's go rename everything. So here's all of my joints for the center and left side of the body. So let's go rename. So this joint right here is the shoulder. But I want to add that indicator joint underscore L underscore shoulder. We'll work our way outward. Joint left elbow. Alright, we'll go back and name all of these. So this is like a joint wrist, like joint left wrist. I can remove the rest of this. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and name all these fingers, and then we will get to the rest of it. So this is joint left thumb 1. This is the pointer, point 1. I'm going to name it, so before I mirror, I go ahead and have everything named properly. Point 3, pint. The last one should be the pinky, and everything else should be named. Pink 1. Do it over here too. Pink. Do left pink 2. Time consuming but necessary to name everything. Pink 3. So make sure we have all of our joints named there. Alright, gotta go get the legs. Joint left knee. Joint left ankle. You can name them by the actual, anatomically correct human bone. Base, let's see. Joint left toe base. Or I'm just going to call them by their joint name. Joint left toe end. There we go. Alright, I'm using an underscore because that's the only special character you can name objects with in Maya. Alright, so there is all of my joints named for half of the body and the torso. The next thing I'm going to do before I parent is to come in here and rotate any joint that I need to rotate. So like for my shoulder, that's going to stay completely straight. My elbow, my wrist, but my fingers, like this thumb joint, it's not aligned to the thumb. So I'm going to get my rotate tool. I usually like to align the Z-axis. I'm going to rotate my Z-axis. So the rotational axis for this thumb joint follows down the length of my thumb. I can do this from the top view. That might be a good way to make sure we align everything. Let's go to X-ray joint. So this one I'm going to do the same thing. Let's rotate it so the Z-axis is down the length of the finger. And we're going to do the same thing for the rest of my fingers. So make sure that Z-axis is aligned facing down towards the next joint. Same thing, we'll rotate this one backwards and align the Z-axis towards the next joint. Okay. My other joints are going to be pretty good except for my hip. So let's find my left hip. Okay. And I'll rotate this one so my Z-axis follows down to my knee. So I'll zoom out so you can see Z-axis is going to follow the blue axis. It's going to follow down to the knee. The knee is going to rotate backwards and follow towards the ankle. There we go. And my ankle is an omnidirectional one, so I'm going to leave that one as is. My toe, I can rotate my Z-axis at 90 degrees, so that follows to the toe end. And let's do the same thing for the base toe. The toe's fine, I don't really need to worry about that too much. But I always like to have the Z-axis follow in the direction of the movement. There we go. So I can go back to my pelvis, rotate my Z-axis forward, just do a negative or a positive 90. And go. Rotate that. So Z-axis is forward, just so that everything is consistent here. See if we can work our way up and select and rotate all of these at the same time. Nope, it only did one. So we'll manually rotate all of these. Should have done it, but for whatever reason it didn't. So that rotates the Z, so the Z's forward. I'm actually rotating the Y value, which will change the Z axis to be facing forward. But it's important before we mirror and even parent our joints up that our joints are rotated to the proper angle. There we go. All right, that's really important for our hip, knee, and ankle, that those are rotated properly, and our finger joints. Now, those are all rotated towards the angle of their own individual joints. All right, so now all we have to do is parent up our joints outward from the furthest away from the pelvis all the way up to the pelvis. The pelvis is going to be our main root joint for the entire body, and we want to parent everything up so that the root joint is the highest hierarchy node. So it's going to be a parent-to-child relationship, so we're going to go outward. Let's start with the toe, and then I'm going to shift select the next joint up, the toe base, and hit P for parent. That's going to create a joint, a bone in between that. Let's back up one step. Actually, before I do that, I want to drag select all of my joints, and let's scale them down. So if I go to the channel box, there's a radius. 0.5 is the scale of those joints as default. You can type in something larger like 0.8 and makes them larger, or something smaller like 0.2. Let's just try 0.3. I think that should be large enough, but not too large. So I just scaled all of my joints down from 0.5 to 0.3. I did this before I parented as well. All right, now I can select my toe end, shift select my toe base, and hit P for parent. Creates a bone in between that. That means my toe base is the parent for the toe end. If I look at my hierarchy in my channel box, if it's indented in underneath another object, that means this object, the toe end, is a child of the toe base. I'm going to select the toe base and shift select the ankle and hit P. If I open up my hierarchy again, you can see ankle is the parent of toe base. Toe base is the parent of toe end. We'll keep working our way up. So we'll shift select, have the ankle selected first, shift select the knee, P for parent. Knee, shift select the hip, P for parent. Select the hip, shift select the pelvis, P for parent. So the pelvis is the parent for the entire leg. You can see it indented each time. Let's go to the fingers, and let's start outwards, the end thumb to the base thumb, P for parent. Outer pointer to middle pointer to base pointer. I'm hitting P every time I do this, P for parent. Outer pinky to middle pinky, P. Middle pinky to base pinky, P. And then I'm going to shift select, I'm going to select first off the base for the pinky, then shift select the base for the pointer and the base for the thumb, and then finally shift select the wrist joint and hit P for parent. Now that parented each one of those base fingers underneath the wrist. So then I can select the wrist, shift select the elbow and P for parent. elbow, shift select the shoulder, P for parent. As you notice, when I'm clicking and dragging, it's only going to select the joints and not the geometry. It's because it has a selection hierarchy of selecting joints over geometry first. Let's go to our antenna and work our way down. So top antenna, the next one, P for parent. Work our way all the way down here. P for parent each time. P for parent. Alright, so there's my base antenna. I'm going to shift select on my head joint, P for parent. Head to, whoop, missed one. Head to neck, P for parent. Neck to this arm base, P for parent. Middle spine. I'm going to select the arm and also shift select that middle spine, P for parent. So that joint right there is the root right now of the entire head and the entire arm. And then with that spine 2, I'm going to shift select spine 1, P for parent. And then I'm going to shift select spine 1 to the pelvis and P for parent. The pyramids for the bones, wireframe pyramid, will always show you the direction of the child. So if the pointed end is pointing to this joint, that means this joint is a child of this joint above that. So the thick end of the bone tells me the parent, the thin end of the bone tells me the child. So now if I select my pelvis, if I look at my hierarchy, if I hold down the shift key while hitting the plus symbol, that'll open up the entire hierarchy. So that's the shift select on that plus symbol. The pelvis should select everything. So there's what our hierarchy looks like now. So last step we need to do is make sure we mirror over our arm and leg. When I modeled this character, I made sure that the left arm and right arm are direct mirror copies of each other. So that way when I mirror my joints over, I know my left side and right side of the joints will be mirrored over exactly as well. So we have to have the shoulder joint parented to the spine, central axis of the body. And then I'm going to select the shoulder joint. I'm making sure I have everything named to begin with. Go correct this one that says pink spine. There you go. So I'm going to select back the shoulder joint. And I'm going to go to skeleton, mirror joints, but I'm going to go to the box beside it. And I want to mirror this across the x-axis. The x-axis is the axis that's parallel to the arms. You can see that by the bottom icon down here. So I want to change the mirror across to YZ. And I've added a capital L to indicate this is the left side. So I want to say search for capital L, replace with capital R. That way when I mirror this over, it will then say joint right elbow, JL elbow, instead of J or R elbow, instead of joint JL elbow. So search for capital L, replace with capital R, mirror across YZ, and apply. So that should put it right on top of the arm, exactly a mirror copy of the other side. You could do the same thing for the leg. I'm going to select the hip. Make sure my hip joints are selected and named. I just need to select the base hip joint, mirror across YZ, search for L, replace with R, mirror that over. So if I look at those two mirrored sections, and now it says joint right shoulder. And it's this one over here, joint right elbow, joint right hip, joint right knee. And I know those are the exact copies mirrored over on the axis. So once again, if I select the pelvis, that should select all of my joints. So that's the joints that I need for this robot character and how to effectively set them up. The next video we're going to come back and talk about how to skin our geometry to the joints, so when the joints move, the geometry moves with it.